Hi everyone and welcome to my guide for the Ball Lightning Sorcerer in Diablo 4 Season 10. This is a build I've been blasting a lot with lately. This is super fun, super fast and flies through those maps thanks to one cast teleport resets. So every time you cast the Ball Lightning you will get a teleport back thanks to the teleport enchantment. And how to make that work I'll show you in a second with the planner. So with this build you can farm, for example here around pit 80s extremely fast down to like 60 seconds. Between like 60 to 90 seconds is usually my average. So you can just permanently move, teleport, and everything that touches you will evaporate effectively. This build is based on the Okun's Catalyst offhand. This is one of the unique offhands for Sorg that gives you this spinning ball lightning. In the past, this was an aspect, but it has been changed. So in case you have played Ball Lightning, maybe in Season 2, where it was pretty popular, this now works a little bit differently. But the core of the build is relatively unchanged. And thanks to the Chaos Armor, we can make the one cast teleport reset actually very consistent, even with relatively low gear requirements. Usually you need a lot of cooldown reduction, a Harlequin Crest, and so on in order to make this happen reliably. But this time around, we can do a Flicker Step Chaos unique, either on chests or pants or glove slot or even helm. And as soon as you get one of those, you can already do the full speedrun combo effectively. So this is one of the best builds to play in the game for any kind of speed farming. It decimates Torment 4, including the lab bosses. I melt them in like 1 or 2 seconds with my setup here. And yeah, you can farm 80s no problem once you have a decked out character. And also push into like the probably around 120 or so range with the push version that I'm also going to show you. So let's jump in. This build is based on Northor's Ball Lightning guide on max roll. So I took his setup when I started this and then I did some tweaks, which I have here in my own planner. But I want to show off the max roll guide here. There's a lot of information about how to progress this character, and for example the starter variant and so on. And there's a few tweaks that are different from what I'm about to show you. So just wanted to highlight this here. There's also a link in the description. And here is my own planner. So we have the starter, this is unchanged. Also the pit push is unchanged, and I did the some tweaks here on Ancestral and Mythic, which I have also noted here, for example. Mostly I made it a little comfier and speedier, and took out a little bit of the relatively unnecessary power, I guess. That just helps to make this like a really comfy speed farming build from the start with the Mythic variant here. But just to show this off, like where you start with this, this is a build based on Mana Shield. So here we don't stack any life at all. Instead we try to get a lot of int. Int gives us damage and more mana. And we have a very large mana pool of like 10k plus, for example, as you can see here, and ridiculous amount of mana regeneration. So the mana regeneration comes from the Mana Shield as well. When you don't take damage, you get a 5000% multiplier for your mana regen. And then you can also press Blizzard, and Blizzard gives you mana regen per maximum mana. So as long as you have one of those up, you will never run out of mana. And Mana Shield itself, it makes you effectively immortal. So as far as I know, this is a little bit bugged and gives you way more damage reduction than it should for some reason. But effectively you can't die as long as you don't constantly like drain your own mana down to 0 effectively. So this is very strong, and it ensures that we can always cast our spells because we're trying to make our Ball Lightning cost a lot of mana. As you can see here, mana cost 512, and it's a bit later, it's less a little bit later on, so here 318 still. It depends on how many skill ranks you have in your skill here. So this is 41 ranks, for example, in Ball Lightning. And with the Advanced Techniques perk, the mana cost goes up. This is why this is such a crazy number, even with a Ring of Starless Skies. So the more ranks you invest, the more damage you get, but the more mana cost you get. But we don't really care that much about the mana cost because you can regenerate thousands per second as long as you have the Blizzard running. And on top of that, we can also benefit from actually spending that much mana with the Banished Lord's Talisman. So this is included here in the setup. And every time you spend 275, you get a guaranteed overpower. And then we try to get 100% crit chance. And together we get this 72% bonus. We get a core ranks, which gives us even more damage. And it has a bunch of other nice stats. So this is a very powerful item to include here. So without the Starless Skies, it's very easy to get to 275 resources spent. You don't need that many skill ranks in this anyway. But the more skill ranks you have, the more it costs, and the easier you get the Spanish Lords combo. And even with the Starless Skies giving you 50% resource cost reduction, we can get to the point where we have at least 275 mana cost, which is at 34 skill ranks. So you try to hit 34 with a status, or it can be less without. Another piece of the puzzle to make this work is the Crown of Lucian. So this is also regularly included here, for example, in the Ancestor variant. This helps you to get to a higher mana cost because it makes your resources cost go up by times 2.5. So this is also part of the reason why this costs so much mana. And this is also what we want to include here with a Chaos Armor. So if you have Banished Lords and Crown, you will have no issues proccing the overpower all the time, giving you a pretty nice damage boost. In addition, we also have another really strong Chaos perk, which is Power Siphon. So many builds can't really use this because it just kind of like sets your maximum resources to 0 effectively, but not when you have 10,000 maximum resource. So in that case, you can spam all the ball attacks you want, you get this 100% damage buff, and you barely even see the difference in your maximum resources because you have so much of it. So this is very easily included here. And the last one is Explosive Combinations. Now, personally, I almost never actually press my basic attack to trigger this because I'm just kind of like speed farming and there's spark on the bar, but I don't really care. But if you are still progressing or if you're going for like a bit of higher tiers, then you can press it sometimes, and every 5 seconds you can stack it up to 3 times 20% damage buff. So this is very helpful, especially for bossing and for like pit pushing, for example. A few other items that are included here is the new Galvanic Azurite. This is the lightning ring. Effectively, it brings you a bit of crit and cooldown, and then there's 60% damage buff. The crackle effect and pulling enemies together is something we don't really care about in this case. And it has ranks to Convulsions, which is actually a pretty nice damage passive. So this is a disin here. As long as you have crackling energy, you get 5% damage per point. So this is pretty good, and it's very easy to produce crackles because we have static discharge. So here when you crit with shock skills, which are our ball lightnings and everything else that flies out of them from the unstable currents, we get crackles, and the crackle also cannot dissipate because of supreme unstable currents. And so it pulses for free. So you always have it, and you always have this damage buff here. So you want to try to masterwork up the conversions, for example, and also like put the points in there. Here's also a Locrans Talisman. So ideally you get this thing as a Chaos Armor as well. And with that you get a lot of crit chance, 48%, and you get a ×2 damage multi as well, which is very nice. So since we have so much maximum mana, we max out this extra damage multi, and this is really strong. It also has the extra crit damage that you can masterwork up here for a bit of extra additive. And this is also very nice to include. But you can also get away with, for example, a glove that has core ranks, which is also pretty good. So for example, here in the Ancestor variant, you can see this is like a glove like that. You can throw this one in there, it's also nice, since we have this extra rank scaling with our Advanced Techniques perk here. And the one thing you really care about is getting the Flicker Step on any Chaos slot. Like this, you can get the Teleport cooldown. And let's talk about the Teleport enchantment a little bit. So you see here, for example, this setup has a 2.2 second teleport cooldown on the enchantment, and this is how you can move around every time you cast a ball lightning. So you don't actually need to hit such a low cooldown here when you have a Flicker Step in the build, but Flicker Step has this 2.5 seconds evade cooldown reduction, and then you have a normal pair of boots with 1.5 seconds. So you combined reduce your cooldown by 4 seconds every time you cast. So this means that with a little bit of like actual cast animations, you can get away with something like a 4.5 or 4.3 seconds evade cooldown, and you don't actually need as much cooldown as I have in the setup here. This has a bit of like extra leeway. And if you don't have a Flicker Step, you need a bit more cooldown, because then you have only the boots with the 1.5. In that case, you're aiming for like a 1.7, 1.8 teleport and enchant cooldown. In this case, you have a 1.2, so you can get it very low, and this is kind of overkill. But this also includes a triple masterwork Harlequin Crest here. So you can get away without even the GA, for example, and potentially even without the triple masterwork. So you see this here, this is still 1.7. This would be still fine, but it's kind of hard to make this work without a Flicker Step if you don't have Harlequin Crest. So you're trying to work towards this. Another piece of the puzzle is the Enchantment Master Paragon board here. So this says enchantments are 30% stronger, and this actually reduces the cooldown of the teleport enchant. So this is your main mobility, and in addition to that, we have the teleport on the bar. So what you can actually do is, if you want to go really far, really fast, like 2-3 screens or so, you can do evade, teleport, evade, because the teleport that you do with your regular cast actually counts as an attack and resets your teleport enchant as well. So instead of doing a ball lightning between, you can actually do like a combo of like, 1, 2, 1, and go really fast. And the regular teleport cooldown is also pretty short, so you can press that pretty often. But other than that, I effectively just hold down Ball Lightning at all times, and then you kind of get into the rhythm of when you can cast your teleport enchant, and just like, you know, press space, 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 and you just fly through those maps as you go. And then you can also weave in a little bit of movement. So the way that I do it is I hold down my right click all the time, and then I use my force move on my mouse wheel in order to move forward. And in between that, I also do the teleport enchants and then the teleport casts. So it is a relatively like fast-paced playstyle because, well, you want to teleport as much as possible to go fast with those maps. But you don't have to do the teleports all the time. You can play this pretty chill by just kind of like walking and holding down right click. But it does not work, for example, when you try to move with left click and hold down right click. In that case, your character will just move and not cast. So you have to do the like force move tech. And that's basically all we do. As I mentioned, Spark, I don't really press it. It's mostly there for the elemental synergies passive here. It gives you a bit of extra damage. Unstable currents, you just press that on cooldown, which should be up all the time. So every 10 seconds you want to press this because that triggers a lot of the extra like random effects. And especially lightning spears are important because lightning spears, they make enemies vulnerable when they crit. And so this is our vulnerable application here. And yeah, the extra random shock skills also kind of help a little bit with, for example, stuff like static discharge. Teleport, I mentioned. Flame shield is just a backup. You can also press it sometimes to just become unstoppable if you succeed, or if like a boss does a big move or something like that. And the blizzard, you generally want to keep this up all the time. You don't necessarily have to keep it like permanently, but at least close to that, because it gives you this insane mana regen. And you can also trigger some stuff like extra enemies. And it can also trigger stuff like Hoarfrost to deal extra damage against chilled and frozen enemies. So you want to press that sometimes. Now, one thing that you might notice here is that we don't actually have any barriers in this build. So we don't have stuff like energy focus or ice armor or even like protection, for example, because all of these barriers are based on our life total, which in this setup is 36, turns out. This is thanks to the mana shield, and we cannot actually use barriers. There's like a few barrier effects in the game that have a flat value that would not care about how much life you have, but this is not what we're going for. So instead, this is completely barrierless, and we just make sure that we don't run out of mana, and this protects you. For our aspects, we have the gravitational here on the boots. This is a ball lightning specific aspect. It pulls enemies in. The damage is relatively irrelevant of this, but the pull in is kind of nice. So you kind of jump into packs as you keep spamming your ball lightnings, stuff flies in. It's effectively a bit like a Raymond effect that you just kind of constantly trigger, which is very cool. Then we have I have accelerating here. I think Nova had an Edge Master's aspect, so it's a bit of damage versus attack speed. I like the attack speed more. If you want to squeeze out a bit more DPS, then you can also change this. And he has shredding blades. So you may notice there's no ice blades, but we use this for the extra vulnerable damage, since everything is always vulnerable from our lightning spears. And for example, if you're not quite there yet with the mythic setup, we also have an extra offensive aspect. So here you see we have shredding blades on a glove, for example. And here we have Elementalist aspect. So this gives us all the crit chance, and this is very powerful as well, to make sure that we get 100% before we get Locrin's Talisman, for example. And for the items, you generally want to make sure that you have a lot of core ranks, because as I mentioned, this is very important with advanced techniques, and to get your mana costs up, you actually want them to be higher. So here's ball lightning ranks, here's core ranks, here is the Shaco as well, for example. We have Banished Lords with the core ranks, you have ball lightning or mastery skills on the boots. So you try to get all of those up as much as possible. So that's like the #1 priority on your gear. Then you have the evade cooldown tempers. They're pretty important to make sure your teleport enchant is very low. And then you have, for example, unstable currents cooldown. This helps a little bit to just make sure you always have the 10 seconds cooldown. And otherwise you can do a bit of overpower damage tempers for offense. Or before you have Banished Lord's Talisman, you can also do the shock crit damage tempers, which are nearly the same and also pretty good value. And finally, here's the Paragon. So this is actually completely unchanged from the Maxwell guide. So we have the Ceaseless Conduit. This is for when you have Crackle, you do more damage. So we have that all the time. Enchanted Master, I mentioned, this is pretty important. You also want to make sure that you get a second lightning enchant in there. In our case, we have Arc Lash, which doesn't really do that much, but it does stun enemies, which is kind of nice and can trigger some little things. So there's not really anything there. There's a ball lightning enchant that is not helpful at all because it spawns these static ball lightnings and they don't really do that much when you have Orkun's Catalyst, and there's not really much else. But you want to have a lightning there because once you have a double up on the same element, we get a bit more of a damage buff. Then we have Searing Heat, which is a bit weird. but it turns out that this buffs all of your damage now. So this is why you want to do this, even though it says pyromancy skills have increased crit chance, but also all of your crit damage is increased. And lastly, we have Frigid Fate. So this is the cold board, which is giving us more vulnerable damage, and we make everything vulnerable all the time. In our glyphs here, we have Tactician. So this triggers pretty much automatically, but by just teleporting or pressing Flame Shield, gives a nice damage buff. We have Destruction. This is like the biggest glyph here for lots of crit damage. Then we have Unleash. This is kind of neat because it gives a lot of extra mana regeneration. This is a multiplier to your mana regen. Very nice. And then we have Adept, which is for mastery skills. So this effectively increases your coverage with the ball lightnings and has a pretty nice damage buff. And lastly, this is kind of like a movable slot here. There's Elementalist. So if you do a Blizzard and a Flame Shield, then you get all 3 stacks of the secondary bonus for the 15% damage buff. Or maybe just like 1 or 2 stacks, depending on like, if you actually hit enemies with your stuff. But you can kind of like face roll your Flame Shield and get a bit of extra damage here, for example, as you run through the rifts. Otherwise, you can also put in some other stuff. So there is Control, for example. There is Eliminator, so you can also put a few other glyphs. One thing worth mentioning here is that we don't care about life nodes at all. So as you go through those Paragon boards, for example, this node here, Shelter, it has life and armor. If you're already capped on armor, you don't care about the life, and the armor also doesn't help you when you're capped. So you could leave these things out here. But basically, I just made sure that, okay, there's like no life nodes, and we cannot really profit from that. But you still want damage reduction nodes, for example, or other like, offensive nodes all over the tree. That's pretty much it here for the Ball Lightning Sorc. So go check it out. I had a ton of fun with this. It is pretty comparable to Hydra, I would say, in terms of like how fast it can farm and how high. And I think in pushing it's also relatively close between them. So I keep getting a lot of questions, which of the two is better, Ball Lightning or Hydra, or what about Crackle? So overall, I think all of these 3 builds are relatively comparable. I played a bit of Hydra earlier in the season and a lot last season, and then I decided I want to do more Ball Lightning this time around. So it was a lot of fun, and it felt pretty much equally strong. One last note I want to give here about pit pushing. So this works a little bit differently. So we go for less cooldown. You see there's a partition in there, for example. We don't have 1 cast teleport resets, but we don't really care that much about it. And instead we also go for the Strike of Stormhorn. This is like the big difference here. You go for the Super Ball Lightning instead of the spinning Ball Lightnings. So this just has a bit more oomph when you blast down those big packs and do bosses and so on. So you get a bit more power here. This is like the main difference. And that concludes this guide here. So I wish you good luck with Season 10 and your Sorc if you like this guide. And subscribe for more, and see you guys next time.